Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a hilarious but actually pretty tragic crisis in literature and history. We're talking about surviving main character energy. You know how history is usually written by the victors, right? The protagonists, the big heroes. But the fascinating source material we're looking at today asks a very different question. What about the guy standing just slightly to the left of the hero, holding a clipboard, desperately wondering if he's going to get overtime for this?
Seriously, what about the background extras? We all love to obsess over heroes with epic narrative arcs and deep character development, but in doing all that, we completely ignore the innocent bystanders, the NPCs, the minor figures whose only real crime was literally just being in the wrong place at the exact wrong time, right when some hero decided to have a protagonist moment.
Okay, let's dive into this contrast, because it's pretty wild. On one side, you've got the grand historical narrative. Think Achilles conquering Troy, looking absolutely glorious in the history books. But on the other side, the stark NPC reality. Picture the poor guy whose entire job was just to polish Achilles' shield. It's a massive, massive contrast. The epic scale of these mythological heroes completely overshadows the very real, highly stressful lives of the background characters who just get swept up in their chaotic wake. Section 1. Welcome to the chorus.
These were everyday people who definitely did not ask to be part of an epic quest. As the historical record so perfectly puts it, they had mortgages and relationship problems. They were just trying to get through their shift. I mean, we really have to have some empathy for these background extras caught in the blast radius of history. From their own perspective, they were the main characters of their own lives. And then suddenly, boom, some wild history-altering event just erupts around them while they're just trying to meet a quarterly quota.
Section 2. Legends ruin small businesses. Because think about it, legends and myths, they were actually massive economic disruptions for local entrepreneurs. Here's a textbook example of unfair historical framing. History paints Joseph Bar Haley as this heartless innkeeper who denied shelter to the Son of God in Bethlehem. But what was the actual reality? Well, Caesar Augustus suddenly orders a full population count with absolutely zero advance notice. So Joseph, he's just a stressed-out hospitality manager trying to run a tiny 12-room inn. Suddenly, he's facing a 300% occupancy surge, as well as running totally dry, and Suite 3 has a backed-up latrine because somebody decided to flush a pomegranate down it. So when Mary and Joseph show up, he literally doesn't have a single room left, but he still offers them a structurally sound stable and even waives the resort fee. Honestly, it was a perfectly reasonable business decision during an unforeseeable infrastructure nightmare.
And here's another victim of main character energy. Wooher, the tavern keeper of the Mos Eisley Cantina. Consider his itemized insurance claim after an elderly religious extremist with a laser sword completely ruined his afternoon shift. The guy's just trying to run a respectable establishment. He's got a strict no blasters policy, right? And suddenly, out of nowhere, he's dealing with a severed human arm on the counter. He's billing 200 credits just for the hazmat cleanup, plus another 800 credits for 40 destroyed bottles of premium jet juice. And naturally, you guessed it, his insurance claim was completely denied due to acts of the force.
Then we had the tragic defense of Silas, who was just a traveling bean merchant. History remembers him as the greedy guy who scammed Jack with magic beans. But as Silas desperately points out in his deposition, beans aren't weapons, they're legumes. He literally just sold a kid some slightly moldy beans in exchange for a half-dead cow. He had absolutely no idea they were magic. He certainly didn't tell the kid to go climb the giant beanstalk, and he definitely didn't tell him to commit a cross-dimensional giant burglary. And yet Silas gets his cart smashed by a falling giant, he gets banned from the village, and Jack the literal burglar is hailed as a hero. Make it make sense.
Section 3. The bureaucracy of epic chaos.
So moving from small businesses over to the public sector, it turns out civil servants face some seriously soul-crushing bureaucracy when catastrophes strike. Now, 63. What does that mean? That is the exact number of pages in the unread municipal sanitation report held by Quintus Publius Maximus during the assassination of Julius Caesar. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole problem. Quintus had waited 8 agonizing months to get FaceTime with the dictator to finally fix Rome's sewers. Instead of participating in the fall of the Republic, Quintus spent the entire Ides of March doing a panicked geometric cha-cha just to avoid getting patrician blood on his expensive triple-layered Egyptian linen toga. His 63-page color-coded proposal was never read, and the sewers, yeah, they stayed flooded. It turns out, even the underworld has terrible HR. Just look at how Sharon the ferryman's grievances stack up against the corporate responses. Sharon has been pulling souls across the river Styx for 3,000 years. His boat constantly leaks. He's breathing in toxic misery fumes with absolutely zero hazard pay. And his compensation for all this? 1 single obol per soul.
That's a currency that literally hasn't been in circulation for millennia. And when he finally files a formal complaint with Haiti's HR department, they brush him off, telling him a sinking boat is functioning within acceptable parameters. They even deny him collective bargaining rights because apparently the dead don't have labor laws. Classic. Or consider the poor scribe Thera, who was forced to document the sheer fiscal irresponsibility of Atlantis right before it sank. Look at these approved vanity projects. They greenlit a giant gold statue of King Atlantis, a physically impossible project to make the entire city float, and magically harvested decorative clouds. Meanwhile, Thera actively warned the council that the volcano was unstable. She did everything right. She followed proper procedures, she begged them to look at the math, but no, they ignored her. They actually cut the volcano monitoring budget, and 3 weeks later, Atlantis was sitting at the bottom of the ocean.
Section 4. Accidental Architects of Doom. All right, now let's pivot a bit to those minor characters whose tiny, totally mundane actions accidentally spiraled into civilization-ending catastrophes. You know, the fall of Troy didn't actually start with complex geopolitics. It started with a handmaiden named Phaedra. Here's how it went down. Step 1, Phaedra hands Helen of Sparta a mirror simply so she can check for parsley in her teeth before a big banquet. Step 2, Helen looks in the mirror and suddenly realizes her face is geometrically perfect and basically weaponizable. Step 3, she feels so alive that she just elopes with Paris of Troy. And Step 4, a 10-year bloody siege begins and Troy burns to the ground. All of that just because a handmaiden encouraged some good dental hygiene at the worst possible moment.
Eris, the goddess of discord, had a pretty similar realization. After getting snubbed for a wedding invitation, she pettily tossed a golden apple inscribed "for the fairest" right into a group of super insecure goddesses. The resulting vanity contest literally sparked the Trojan War. But, as Eris herself notes, I just accelerated it with an apple. Her point is, mortals really don't need much help finding reasons to fight. That war probably would have happened over trade routes or hurt feelings eventually anyway. She just sped up the timeline with a piece of fruit.
And then there's the ultimate historical scapegoat, the serpent in the Garden of Eden. When you look at his actual HR performance review with Lucifer, the serpent argues he was quite literally just doing his job. He was given super vague instructions to basically see what happens, so he used his excellent persuasion skills, which, by the way, were noted as a core strength, to encourage some critical thinking in Eve. He rightly points out the massive systemic management failure of placing a delicious, forbidden tree right in the middle of a garden and then leaving a morally flexible snake completely unsupervised. Yet his so-called area for improvement is causing the fall of man on his very first assignment, and his reward is eternal infamy.
Section 5. The Weight of the Background.
Up until now, we've mostly looked at the logistical and bureaucratic nightmares of being in the background. But there's also a surprisingly heavy psychological and moral weight to being adjacent to history. Take Marcus Whitbrook, for example. He was the third spear carrier from the left in the original Globe Theatre production of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Now, his public review simply reads, "competent spear work." But the private reality? 18 years of intense performance-related therapy. Why? Because on opening night, right at the pivotal moment when Polonius is stabbed, Marcus misses his tiny 3-word cue. He completely freezes. And he freezes because he's entirely consumed by a totally mundane household anxiety. He couldn't remember if he left the oven on at home.
So the crucial point here is captured perfectly in Marcus's heartbreaking confession to his therapist. "I'm the absence where a footnote should be." I mean, think about it. He was standing on the stage of the most important play in English history, performing right in front of the Queen, and he threw his one single chance at greatness away just because he was stressed about a tavern tab and a potential fire hazard. He has to carry the trauma of his own mediocrity for the rest of his life.
But sometimes, being a minor character carries a terrifyingly real moral cost. Consider the letters of Marcus Flavius. He was the personal secretary to Pontius Pilate. During the trial of Jesus, Marcus was just a civil servant sitting there, taking notes. He knew for a fact the prisoner was innocent under Roman law. He sat there and watched his boss, Pilate, totally cave to a mob simply to avoid a riot that might hurt his political career. Marcus writes, "I took notes, I filed papers, and a man died." He realizes, with absolute horror, the sheer tragic cost of just doing his administrative job, of staying quiet and keeping his head down when he actually could have spoken up.
Which brings us to a final, lingering question that we really all need to ask ourselves. When history happens, when the truly monumental events of your era start unfolding right in front of you, are you the main character? Or are you just the one taking notes, holding the clipboard, desperately trying to survive the shift? thank you so much for exploring the tragedy of the chorus with us in this explainer. Keep this all in mind the next time you see a background extra on screen, because they have a whole entire world of their own.